Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. With ranges up to 150 feet and hoppers that can hold 160 rounds, Pepperball is perfect for controlling large crowds or group disturbances on your yard. Pepperball allows for non-lethal direct impact to control inmates who refuse to comply with lawful orders, and area saturation allows you to achieve buffer zones between groups, or use it for area denial to keep inmates away from security equipment and other accessible areas. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in this show's information guide. Pepperball is the safer option first. He was a warden at Kentucky State Penitentiary from 1993 to 2002. After he retired in 2002, he returned to KSP as warden from 2009 to 2011 for a total of 12 years dealing with a maximum security prison that is quite well known. Parker began his career as a correctional officer in 1978, or as a guard, as he refers to it. And we'll get more into that later because we're going to cover his book today. Warden Parker is best known as the first warden in 35 years to oversee an execution by electrocution in Kentucky, a very publicized event and something that affected his life even to now. And we'll talk some more about that. He's also the author of Guard, a true story of duty, sacrifice, and leadership in Kentucky's maximum security penitentiary. So I'd like you guys to welcome him to the podcast. I'm excited to have him here. How are you doing today, Mr. Parker?
Just fine. Thank you.
Excellent. I always start my interviews off the same way. I like to hear about, where you grew up. Tell me what that was like. What was it like when you were young? Where did you grow up at?
Okay. I grew up in a rural community in western Kentucky, near a little settlement called Possum Trot. So as a possum, I tell people I grew up in Possum Trot, Kentucky. But it was rural area. I graduated from high school in 1970. Mm-hmm. And back then we were all the boys were waiting to be drafted. And so it was kind of hard to plan your future knowing that you might be drafted or probably would be drafted. And then it came out with a lottery, and my number was low, so I knew I would sooner or later have to enlist or be drafted. As it turned out, I was drafted, but I didn't pass the physical because I had flat feet, unbeknownst to me, because I'd done that. I practiced karate in college, and I never knew my flat feet was an impediment, but apparently it disqualified.
The Army thought it was.
They thought it was. So, which at the time, it was okay with me. Not many people wanted to go into the service. A lot of people wanted to go to the draft if they enlisted, but not many wanted to go if they were drafted because it's a sure thing you're going to Vietnam. Yep. So, I would have done my part, but I just wasn't selected. So that put me on a track to finish college and start a career. Didn't know where, but I ended up starting a career at the penitentiary. Okay. I was a correctional officer. And then I was determined to work my way up in the system. I saw a lot of opportunity.
Well, let me ask you a question first. Mm-hmm. So what was that? How did you find that job? Did you know people that worked in corrections? Was this just luck of the draw?
Well, as it turned out, I had started teaching karate after I got my black belt, and some of my students, I was teaching at the university and in some local dojos, but some of my students were guards or lieutenants, captains at the penitentiary.
Right.
And that was back in the days when they had what was called a LEAP grant, a law enforcement grant to go to college. So they were taking, of course, my class would have been an easy class, a 1 hour, it would add 1 hour to their, I think after every 15 hours, they got a 5% raise.
Oh.
So they had a lot of motivation to go to college.
Okay.
And that's how I got to know them, because I was pretty good. I was entering tournaments at the time and winning. But anyway, they told me, if you ever need a job, come see us.
Okay.
And so, after about a year of graduate school, I was burned out, and I thought it's time for me to do something else. So that was really the only job I had available to me that I knew of.
Okay.
And I went ahead and signed up and entered the old castle, as it's called, the penitentiary.
Sure. So tell me about that first day. What was it like walking, hearing the bars close, looking up at, the big stone walls? And
well, of course, I didn't have any close friends there. So I didn't have very many to guide me. I had people I knew, but I wouldn't say they were close friends.
Sure.
Actually, they were supervisors, most of the people I knew. But when you see that place for the first time, it just kind of makes you stop and your mouth drops. It's like, oh my God,
Right.
look at that place. It looks like an old castle, and it's situated on what it used to be a river town, Cumberland River, and then it was dammed. I think in the early '60s, and it formed a lake. So the lake surrounds the penitentiary.
Oh,
And
wow.
it looks like an old castle. It was built in the 1880s. They brought over Italian stonemasons to build it, and they used quarried limestone. It's just amazing how they cut the rock and constructed that place without any modern tools. It still amazes me. There's every block, limestone block, fits like a glove. They're not cemented in or mortared in. They're just they set, and every cut is perfect, and it's a huge place.
Yeah.
So it's very intimidating. My first day, as I was going up the steps to the front gate entry, I saw men come out of a little out of the bottom of a gun tire right at the front steps, and they came out with shotguns, and they ran past me, and I thought, my God, what's that about? And I didn't know till later in the day that 3 inmates had escaped from 4 cell house.
Wow.
That was my first day. So that's what greeted me as I was going up to the front gate was a mass escape and officers scrambling to go out and catch the 3, which they did. But at that time, in those days, there wasn't a control center to open the gate. So an officer had to key the lock and let me in. And I knew I was entering a different world as soon as I stepped into that place.
And don't you think that's why they designed? Because you take a look at the prisons designed, Missouri State Pen. I've been to West Virginia, out there, Kentucky State Penitentiary. Those things were designed to intimidate. I think that was part of the law enforcement or the justice thought was, I don't want to be there. That's why they built them like that. And I think we feel that when we walk in for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt that way. I thought, hey, I'm going to give it a try. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't really afraid, but I was certainly intimidated.
Yeah.
I don't think I was ever afraid in there. Maybe once or twice, but it was a whole new world for me. I caught on pretty quick. It wasn't, I had some old school guards that took me under their wing and kind of helped me along a little. They'll let you fumble around for a while and then they'll help you. And that's kind of the way it was. Yeah. But I couldn't find my way around, and that's kind of embarrassing when they tell you to go somewhere, report somewhere, and then where in the hell is that? This place is big.
Right.
And you think, okay, you don't want to act stupid like you don't know where it is. But anyway, they told we had to report to the prison hospital for a physical the first day. And we didn't know how to get there. I was with 2 other new hires, and we walked around the yard. We thought we could see a sign that said hospital or something, but we didn't. So finally, somebody felt sorry for us and told us where we needed to go. So we were called fish officers, and new inmates are called fish. I don't know if that's universal or it's just peculiar to the Kentucky Penitentiary, but so I don't know. I don't know. I've always wondered that if other prisons call.
I've heard the inmates called fish.
Yeah,
we weren't called fish. We were. I mean, there's effing rookie was. I mean, that was a term of endearment when you were new. You know.
Well, we were called fish, just like the inmates. New inmates coming in were called fish inmates or inmates, and we were called fish officers. So anyway, kind of exciting, and a little bit depressing, to be honest with you. Our uniforms were terrible. I worked a lot of days without even a pair of handcuffs because there just weren't enough to go around. A lot of officers bought their own. And I thought, and I'm not doing that. If they want me to have handcuffs, they'll give me handcuffs. But I learned to make an arrest or take an inmate to the hole without handcuffs. And an old guard taught me that. He said, Parker, I said, what am I going to do after a takedown if I don't have handcuffs? He said, that's really not a problem. They'll go with you. Just tell them, just say, hey, come with me. And they'll go. Once the fight's over, once you've broken up the fight or the stabbing, whatever it is, just tell them to go with you. They'll go. Yeah. And if they don't, they know what's coming next. You might have to fight them again, but there's going to be other officers coming, and they don't want to face that. They'll go with you. And sure enough, that's pretty much how it went. There's a lot of times I'd have a takedown and not have any handcuffs. Afterwards, you say, hey, come, go with me. And they'll go, amazingly. But that's the way we did it.
Yeah, and I remember a few times Missouri State Pen was violent, like you talked about in your book, like Kentucky was. And you might let an inmate walk in front of you all the way down the hall to the seg unit because he wasn't going to get cuffed, afraid not of you, but that he'd get jumped again before he could get put in the hole. But most of them knew when they threw the first punch how their day was going to end. They knew they were going to the hole.
They knew. Yeah. And you're right. They had no protection if you cuffed them other than the officer escorting them.
Right.
But at least they had a fighting chance if they weren't cuffed. And I saw that play out several times. Inmates would be cuffed and be surrounded by inmates who wanted to kill them or whatever. And that's a bad situation to be in. I described one of those situations in a riot we had in 1986. They were escorting an inmate to the hole, and they were a group of inmates surrounded them and was trying to kill the guy, and they fought off these inmates. But about 10 minutes later, a full-scale riot erupted.
Right.
But anyway, if you read the book, you'll see that incident where the 2 officers that was escorting that inmate managed to fight him off long enough, and a gun tire was firing warning shots at the same time, so that helped too. But anyway.
Well, speaking of the book, let me go to the book here. You talked about getting hired on as a correctional officer, but you talk about being a guard. And I'm going to the book here. By 1977, the employee classification of guard was changed to Correctional Officer 1 and 2. Correctional Officer 1 was a classification for officers without a high school diploma, and Correctional Officer 2 was reserved for those with a high school diploma. The phrase fair, firm, and consistent became the correctional officer's creed. This was being taught in every state and is still taught today. We were told to use correctional officer and inmate. The terminology seemed more humane and professional to all of those that were involved. To this day, however, I do not think we ever won the battle to change public perception to use the new prison terminology. People ask me if I started as a guard, and I often tell them and I often hear the term jail or prison guard used in newspaper articles. Most professionals in our business cringe when they hear the word guard. And as a warden, I politely used this to political attorneys and news media. In retrospect, decades after the word guard became taboo, I view it with affection because most of my early mentors started as guards. They were not educated. They were uneducated or brutal, or not brutal. They were tough, but they were professional. They were firm, fair, and consistent. But make no mistake, they were strong when they needed to be. They were proud to be a guard. And so tell me about that. That's
okay.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Well, I started in a time period, well, in the late 70s, when that classification had just changed. And I've showed a guard badge in the section of pictures in my book. There's a badge that said guard. Mm-hmm. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, we were taught that's a really bad word, and a lot of people today, I mean, I'm sure, and that's one of the criticisms I get of the book, but I said, and I always explain, read the book and you'll see it's not a bad term. Mm-hmm. For me, it's an honor to be called a guard because the toughest men I ever worked with, the best in the business, or at least when I started, they started as guards, and they were guards up until they made rank or until the classification changed. Mm-hmm. So I look at, and even when I retired, after I was warden the first time, after 9.5 years as warden, when I retired, some of the old convicts, now there's that word, that had been there since I'd been there. So we kind of grew up together inside that penitentiary, and they wanted to walk with me my last day as a warden. And I said, sure, come on, let's walk around. So I walk around the yard with these old convicts, gang leaders. I mean, they had been really hell raisers in their younger days, but they, and they would go, hey, we're walking with the OG. Now, OG either means old gangster or old guard.
Right.
In the prison context, I said, I'll just accept that as an old guard. That's an honor for them to call me an old guard.
Right.
And if you call them convict, they say, I'm not an inmate, I'm a convict. Right. The older guys will tell you that. Yep. And they're proud to be a convict. And so, as time went on, I began to view the term guard with as a term of endearment. It's the people I admired the most in this business throughout my entire career started as guards. Yeah. So that's why I called the book Guard. I think if I'd called the book Correctional Officer, I don't think anybody would have bought it. To be honest with you. Right. But Guard kind of you want to see what that's about, and so it has kind of created a lot of interest. But it's not a bad word. If you read the book, you'll see it's not a bad term at all, even though we were taught to never use it. So anyway, that's my explanation of guard. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
It's not at all. I've never minded it. If you go back to some of my paperwork, which was years after you, but 1992 was when I was hired into Missouri State Pen. I still have some of my original contract stuff that I signed, in HR, and it still lists guard because we were making that change into correctional officer. Yep. And when I named this podcast, I've always thought correctional was a misnomer for what I did.
It is.
I'm a prison officer. I'm a guard.
That's right.
Now, does that limit me to being a turnkey, like the 1700s? Mm-hmm. No, I'm more than a turnkey, but that is what I started off doing, was turning keys. So I don't mind it. I don't. What do you think about what do you think about some of the change that they're bringing now? The newest one is AIC, adults in custody. They're trying to change the term inmate like it's something bad. And I don't think inmate's a bad word.
Let me back up and say one thing. Okay. I don't think I ever corrected an inmate. I didn't see myself as correcting anything. I didn't correct anything. I guarded them. Sure. I guarded the community, I kept them guarded inside that prison so they wouldn't escape.
Sure.
Or we tried our best to. Yeah. And I guarded them, keep them from killing each other. And but I never corrected one that I know of. I mean, rehabilitation, maybe. Yeah, we did that. Yeah. But as far as correcting them, that's kind of I'd rather think of us as prison cops, sure. Prison police or something like that, but prison officers, if you want to call it that. But yeah.
That's the term.
So anyway, that's another way to look at it. Now, what was the question I didn't answer?
So now they're saying inmate's a bad word, and they've changed. A lot of places are trying to force adults in custody or AIC.
Incarcerated people.
Incarcerated people.
That's crazy.
Justice.
Just call them convicts.
Yeah, exactly.
Hell, they're convicted felons. I mean, call them convicts. Call them inmates. What does it matter? What does it matter?
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. I don't get it. I'm an old school guy. I wouldn't make it in that kind of environment today because I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I'd say that's I'm just not going to do that. And I would not sell panties and bras in the commissary.
No.
Not in my prison. Not in my prison. We're not going to.
Right.
Now, but it's happening today in the prisons. I hear. I don't know.
It is. I saw some of it as I was headed out. Absolutely.
Well, and my term as warden and I was 17 years total because I was warden in Ohio.
Right.
And I ran a jail after I got done with all the prisons. So anyway, about 17 years as a warden. And if there was if they came out with something out of headquarters that was controversial, it's something that I couldn't live with or something I thought was dead wrong, I just tell them about it. And I say, we're not doing that. We're not doing it. And I got by with that. I don't know how, but I did. I'd stand up to them, say.
Don't you think the old time wardens, that was your institution. That was, you were expected to do whatever it took to run that institution. And now they've stacked on, everybody's a micromanager. They've stacked on all these layers of supervision on top of the wardens. The wardens can't even do their job.
Well, and I saw a little bit of that. Like when we had a nutritionist, for example, in our headquarters, central office, we called it. And she was directing all the food service managers in all the prisons to do this, do that. And then I'd get surprised. I usually ate at least one meal a day in the mess hall.
Sure.
I just made it usually it was breakfast. I'd go in 5:30 and go straight to the mess hall and get the same tray the inmates got. I'd get in line with them and I'd try to sit down with them. They didn't want me sitting with them a lot of times, but anyway, that's just the way I operated. I didn't take a bodyguard. I didn't do any of that. I just went and got a tray and had breakfast with them. And that allowed me to but anyway, let's get back to the point. The nutritionist would dictate this, dictate that, and they took salt and pepper away, and they took coffee away. And I said, well, when is somebody going to tell me that we're doing this? Because I'm the one that's got to face this when I go out on the yard, and inmates say, hell, they won't even give us salt and pepper anymore.
Yeah.
And so I asked the question, my food service manager, why aren't they getting salt and pepper? Well, because it's bad for their health. It raises their blood pressure. I said, when in the hell were you going to tell me? You know, because they thought, well, we work for the nutritionist. I said, you do? Really? Well, then, okay. No, I said, you don't work for the nutritionist. You work for me. Yeah. And that became a struggle in other areas like religion and so forth and so on. And a warden in my day, well, I just wouldn't, I'd tolerate some of it.
Right.
Some battles aren't worth fighting, but no, when it came to a showdown, you're going to do something that's going to upset the inmates, like take salt and pepper away off the table. Right. By God, you better tell me about it. I better know about it before I go out there and face the inmates with it.
Yeah. And
I'll either buy into it or I won't. And I finally, this is such a small issue, salt and pepper. I finally said, and I must use a little bit of bad language here. I said, damn it. The warden said, I'm telling you, put salt and pepper on the line. Salt and pepper their food if they want to. well, I'll get in trouble. I said, no, you're not going to get in any trouble. I said, do it. And I insisted, and she did. So that's the way I had to operate sometimes, just stand up and say, we're not doing that.
Right.
So I don't know if they do it these days. I don't know. Probably not.
Well, now I think, the nutritionist inmates have diets. So this inmate may have one diet where he's allowed this, and this one may have another diet where he's allowed this. So it is what it is. But so we talked about you being a warden here. So let's take that step from correctional officer until you got up to warden. Tell me about those steps.
Well, I had a good opportunity to go up the ranks through the security, and I wanted to. But I had a college degree when I started, which was kind of rare for a guard to have a college degree. So I had more opportunities probably than just the average correctional officer without a degree, because a lot of those jobs like case manager, whatever, you have to have a degree. I did not want to be a case manager. I wanted to stay as a correctional officer. So my first job, my first promotion really wasn't a promotion, but the warden asked me to be his administrative assistant. I did all of his paperwork pretty much, not all of it, but most of it. I wrote all of his letters and responses to inmates and responses to grievances, and I did a lot of investigations and so forth. Yeah. I did that for a couple of years. I don't know, about 3 years. And then I was promoted to, let me think here. I was promoted for about a year into a position called administrative specialist, which we were under a big lawsuit, and so I was the one that documented our compliance with the lawsuit and provided that information to the attorneys and the courts. And within about a year and a half, that job became almost no job. We'd complied with all of it. So then I was promoted to the program director, and that put me in charge of the inmates' legal aids, the recreation department, the chapel, religious programs, and just any kind of inmate work programs and so forth. So I did that for another 3 years, and then I made deputy warden. I made deputy warden in another prison, stayed there 4 years, came back to the penitentiary as a deputy warden. And finally, then I transferred to Ohio as a deputy warden. So I was a deputy warden in three institutions. And then Ohio promoted me to warden, my first warden's job in Northern Ohio. So, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Ohio was a really good system to work for. That's a good system in my book. Really good. They operate way more conservative than Kentucky was operating at the time, and I like that. I feel that's the way I thought a prison system should be run. Very conservative and law and order, and they did a good job for the most part.
Sure, but Kentucky was home, so you went back there in the end.
Yeah, I went right back to where I started, and the reason why is I was tempted by. I found out that they had passed a new regulation to make all the positions, security positions, all the positions inside the prison hazardous duty. Now, what that meant is a little bump in pay, not a great deal, but a bump in pay and a 20-year retirement. I thought, man, I've got to go back for that 20-year retirement. Yeah. And they base your retirement on your highest 3 years. So I would be eligible just about as soon as I transferred back to the penitentiary as warden. Just in a few years, I'd be eligible to retire. Of course, that didn't happen. I didn't retire, but anyway, that's why I came back to Kentucky.
Yeah. So any issues, you left Kentucky State Penitentiary at a lower rank, you come back as a warden. Any issues there, leadership issues?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, as you can imagine, even when I was a deputy warden, and they sent me back to the penitentiary as a deputy warden of security after a mass escape in 1988. They had 8 inmates escape from segregation unit. You couldn't have handpicked 8 worst inmates.
Oh, wow.
And that's a whole book in and of itself right there. But
tell me a little bit though, because that's interesting.
It is very interesting. I wasn't there at the time. Now, I got a phone call that the inmates escaped about 1:30 in the morning. It's a very elaborate escape, and we don't have enough time to go into how they managed to do all that. But 17 inmates had cut the track on their cell door, which allowed the door to swing out. Okay. So, but the door still operated electronically like it's supposed to. I don't know if you can picture that, but okay.
Yep.
So they found out to make this small cut on that track, and the door would hinge out, and they could go out. And they dimmed the lights in the midnight shift. They dimmed the lights so inmates could sleep. And they had big pedestal fans running, which drowned out the noise. Mm-hmm. And fortunately for the inmates, they had a lazy officer on the shift that didn't make rounds. Okay, that's all it took. And 17 had cut out, ready to go. The 8 got out, and they worked for months cutting a hole through the window. Mm-hmm. And then the 9th one, going out the hole, 8 had already escaped. The 9th one was caught by a sergeant who was making rounds on the outside. He was out there to count the inmates in the trustees. They have little quarters, outside inmates, we called them, trustees, whatever. There's 19 or 20 of them. So he was out there to do a count there and make sure everything's okay, because there wasn't an officer stationed there all night. Just do counts is all that was required. But anyway, he spotted the 9th one coming out the window. Okay. And he had checked out a pistol to make outside rounds, and so he marched him back to the prison. He was caught. Anyway, I'm gonna fast forward through that same morning, I got a call from headquarters saying, we need you to put together a response team. We call it E Squad. I think now they call it CERT. Yeah. Put together a CERT team and hightail it to the penitentiary. It's 200 miles away. Get there as quick as you can because it's out of control. The inmates were setting fires inside the prison. They were doing everything they could do to draw the staff back off the manhunt, and that would give the 8 escapees more time to get away. Yeah. So the place was out of control. Even though everything was locked down, they were still setting fire. They were flooding the walks. They were doing everything they could do to draw staff back in. And for the most part, it was working. So I put together a team of 12, 15, I forgot. It was at least 12 officers, and we got there as quick as we could. We had to pack enough stuff because we knew we'd be there for a few days or a few weeks. So we go respond back, but other prisons started sending in response teams. We probably had, I'm going to guess, about 150 total officers from all over the state. 150 plus, that number would also include all the state police that had responded with drug dogs and so forth. And then we had support from the National Guard. They gave us a helicopter to use, and night vision goggles, and mostly that. They didn't give us manpower, right? So we didn't ask for it, but anyway, so we went on this manhunt for the next, and it was kind of interesting to say the least. But in the meantime, we were getting called back to the prison to put out these literal fires, right. Disturbances, and that took us away from the manhunt. But we caught one the next morning, right? And then we caught 2 more. Let's see, trying to get this straight now. You might have to read the book, but we caught 2 more they had stole a car and made it to eastern Kentucky, and somehow they'd gotten a gun and they had to shoot out. Anyway, nobody was shot, but they had to shoot out with state police and our staff. in eastern Kentucky and was captured and brought back. 3 of the inmates got to a kind of a resort town of Dover, Tennessee, which is on the lake. It's on Barkley Lake.
Okay.
And they broke into, well, first of all, they somehow, I don't know where they got the gun. I never did understand where they got the gun, but they had a gun and shot the telephone box. And this old man and woman lived there, a retired couple. They shot the telephone box so they couldn't call for help. And then they shot them through their bedroom window. And they went in and ransacked the house, got money and guns and their car, and they made it all the way to Mexico.
Oh, wow.
They made it all the way. They crossed the border at El Paso. And they were running out of money, but one of them said, I'll have some money wired by Western Union. And he did. He made a phone call and had his family wire the money, but they must have told the FBI. I don't know, because anyway, the FBI was waiting for him when he crossed the border to get the money. And then the Mexican authorities knew that where the 2 inmates were. I guess he ratted on them. I'm sure he did.
Sure.
And they surrounded the motel, drug them out, and threw them across the border illegally to the FBI waiting on the other side. Yeah. Now they spent the next 17 months in the El Paso jail fighting extradition. And when the case finally went to the Supreme Court refused to hear it. So now they're free to be extradited back to Kentucky. We charged them with escape and stealing a vehicle and something else. Then we turned them over to Tennessee. They faced charges, and all 3 of them were on the death row in Tennessee. Last time I checked, when I was writing this book, 2 of them have died, natural causes, and one of them is still on death row in Tennessee waiting to be executed. So that's. I mean, you can make a movie out of that story.
You could.
It's one of the worst things you can think of in a prison to happen, besides an employee getting killed. But here we had 2 innocent people, retired people, that should have lived out their life, in a resort area on a lake, and they get murdered in the middle of the night by escaped convicts. I mean, that's a pretty heavy burden to bear.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, as that turns out in the aftermath investigation, I thought I was done with it after we caught all the inmates, whatever. We went back to normal operations. I took my team back, and we thought we were home free. And then I got a phone call. They wanted me to go replace the deputy warden. They kind of blamed the deputy warden for lax policies or whatever, or poor leadership. And so I got tapped on the shoulder to go back because the place was still out of control.
Yeah.
So anyway, I write about that. I did my part. I went back. Didn't want to, but I did. Sure. And the place was out of control. It really was out of control. There was very little leadership. Everybody was beat down. Morale was terribly low. So I a lot of the people. So I go back as a deputy warden, and here are all these old school guards. A lot of them were lieutenants and captains when I started. They're still there as lieutenants and captains, and now I'm their boss. So it was a little awkward, but I call them everyone in individually and say, "Hey, look, you got to work with me. We're going to get this. We're going to take this place back. We're going to be a little heavy-handed right now. We're going to jerk a knot in their ass, but you won't face any problems from me." And the court has I've been given a mission to get this place under control. And you got to be with me on my team, and we're going to do it. And that's how I kind of faced up to them and told them, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. And there for a while, we were a little heavy-handed. We never had any repercussions. You were reading the book a couple of times. We gave haircuts to them. I mean, we just tried to get control of it, and we did. It got better, but it not enough. we were still having officers getting what we call shut down. They get inmates would throw feces all over them. It was happening way too much, and that was one monster I never quite conquered. They can still do it if they want to.
Sure.
You got to make them not want to.
Yep.
And that's when I said we need a heavy-handed approach. No more soft. No more. Take the gloves off. When they shut down an officer, they're fair game until you get cuffs on them.
Mm-hmm.
So
sure.
You can use force. You can take a heavy-handed approach on these guys until they're cuffed. Once they're cuffed, it's over. I don't want to see anybody getting roughed up after they're cuffed.
Right.
So that's the rule we're going to play by. You got to go in hard and fast, hit hard.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get them cuffed, it's over.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the way we're going to do it, and that's what we did. They had been doing that. It'd been a soft approach.
Right.
They were afraid. See, everything's videotaped, by then, and the deputy warden was criticizing everything and talking about how you're too hard. So they just kind of gave in.
Sure.
And they weren't being hard like they should have been.
Yeah.
They weren't.
And I think
they
it's
weren't
important.
running from. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention because a lot of people that work in corrections these days don't work in places with open bars. Open bars is a whole different world. And you had open bars there at KSP.
At that time we did. Yep.
Yeah. So that working
there.
they
can reach through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they can reach through the bars and grab you. Of course, when I was an officer, I never knew that. Well, I did know of what happened one time, but I'd already made up my mind. If anybody reaches through the bars to grab me, I'm going to break his arm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even going to think twice about it. I'm going to put a hurt on him.
Right.
If he tries to reach through the bars, it'd be really easy to break his arm.
Yeah.
And as far as throwing feces on officers, in my day, that didn't happen. That just didn't happen. They didn't dare do that. Right. Now, bear in mind, we didn't have cameras back in my day when I was an officer.
Sure.
There were no video cameras. It hadn't even been invented yet, I don't guess. Actually, and here's the other thing that's going to surprise a lot of people. Yeah. We did not have policies and procedures. There were no policies and procedures. So, So you had to follow the orders of your supervisor. Mm-hmm. There were post orders in a few places, but it was vague. It didn't tell you anything. Yeah. So you relied on your training, your common sense, and supervisors to operate the prison. That's how it was operated. Yeah. And occasionally a memo would come out, and from the warden, and he would, whatever the issue was, he'd put out a memo. Well, they would read the memo at roll call, but hell, if you're on vacation that week, you didn't know the memo came out. So I mean, it's the way all prisons, I guess, operated, but that's the way we operated until a warden came in and started writing. We started writing policies and procedures, and we bought a video camera, and that was the beginning. I was there before and thereafter. Of course, after is a better way to manage the prison for sure.
Right.
But my point is, in the days before we had policies and procedures and before we had cameras, inmates wouldn't throw feces on an officer. It just never happened. Why? Because I didn't have to get permission to go in a cell and get an inmate out or whatever, do a cell extraction. I do it by myself, and I relied on my own common sense and what it was appropriate.
Right.
It kind of got us in trouble because some officers would do that and wouldn't write a report.
Right.
And it got kind of out of hand. Vigilante justice kind of got out of hand, and we got sued. But those days kind of came to a close when we started having policies and procedures and video cameras to document that we're not abusing force. Right. And you extract an inmate from cell, it's always videotaped now. and I assume it is everywhere. Probably officers have body cameras now.
Yep, there's a lot
I don't
of that.
know, but we didn't. Anyway, so it was a different era. I'm fortunate. My book it will take you from the old days when it was like that to the new days when now everything is by policy and procedure. We're accredited. We have post orders on every post. We have prescribed ways of doing things. I'll tell you, in the old days, it just wasn't like that. It just, but it was still run pretty good. As long as you had a little bit of common sense and you knew right from wrong, you would do fine in there. You would, you'd do okay.
Yeah.
Unless you were just brutal and unless you enjoyed beating up inmates, that didn't happen that much. Not really.
Oh, I mean, there's always 1%. There's always 2-3%. We still have those. Video came out last couple of weeks with some officers, throwing some punches that just absolutely didn't need to be done, and inmate dying. So it still happens these days, but that's not a representative of the profession. That's the fringe bunch. But and I want to say for everybody, we're talking about a lot of stories here out of your book, but you're not even touching most of the book. We're just talking about a few of them here. So I do recommend that if you get the chance, go to Amazon and Guard is the book by Phillip W. Parker. So I do want to encourage everybody to actually read it, and you'll get all the stories.
I've had some good reviews, and the book is selling pretty well. But one of the things that might surprise people is I was the warden for the last electrocution in Kentucky, and actually it was the first execution in 35 years. I happened to be the warden when we executed an inmate by electrocution. Then the law changed and we started lethal injection in 1999. I was the warden to conduct the first lethal injection. So I take the reader behind the scenes and things that happen, especially between me and the inmate.
Let me go to the book, because I've got a spot here that I think sums that up pretty good.
Okay.
I met with McQueen on Sunday morning to offer a last meal. I told him he could order anything within reason. McQueen didn't hesitate. Warden, all I want is cheesecake. That's it? Yep, that's it. Jokingly, I replied, I was afraid you'd order a T-bone steak or something. Cheesecake is my favorite food, McQueen said matter-of-factly. And I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. Afterward, I gently described the procedure we would follow in the minutes leading up to the execution. I told McQueen I would come to his cell and say, it is time. I wanted to assure him that I would safeguard his dignity. We would not cuff you or manhandle you in any way. You are a man. You can walk and sit down on your own. Yes, I will, McQueen agreed. You will not have any problems with me. The reason I picked that is because I think people have this Hollywood, picture of what goes on. And you're showing compassion there, at this time. And I think that's important for people to understand that there is compassion, there is empathy, but it's a job. So tell me some of that. That had to be tough.
That was tough. Let me say this, that I was there when he came into the system in 1981, I believe it was. So I had known this guy for 20 years. He was never a problem. He was always respectful. Now he committed a heinous crime when he was on drugs, drunk and on drugs. Sure. He held up a store and late at night and killed a clerk. Terrible crime.
Right.
He appropriately got the death penalty. I didn't have any qualms about him receiving the death penalty. Well, once he got in prison, he was off drugs. He was a totally different man. He was, and I think anybody that works in the prison system is going to say the same thing. Some of these men are just, you wonder how they could ever commit a crime. Because in prison, when they're not on alcohol or drugs, they're just good people who did bad things.
Sure.
And that's the way I viewed him. Very polite to me. Never got a write-up that I know of. And then we had to execute him. That's a little tough. That's a little tough to do. Now, I would do it. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean it'd be easier. That was never easier. What really, and it haunts me still, is I don't know. Did you read the part where he said, "Warden, sit down and have a piece of this cheesecake. It is so good."
Right.
And I knew there was cameras all around, and we had and we were feeding the video all the way to the governor's office headquarters. They had a command center, mm-hmm. and our command center, and I mean everybody's watching, and I was faced with a situation. What do I do? This guy is so earnest in asking me, "Warden, have a piece of cheesecake. It's so good."
Right.
So not knowing I said, "Well, hell, that's the right thing to do." So I sat down, and he cut me a piece of cheesecake and handed it to me, and I ate it. And now that's something the media didn't know. That's sure. Something that I'm exposing it in the book for the first time. Mm-hmm. But how could I not have a piece of cheesecake? So I sat down, and his chaplain was there. And we had a good conversation, and I finally asked him. I said, "Harold, how are you doing? I mean, how are you really doing?" He said, "Warden, you don't worry about me. I know I'm gonna be with the Lord in about a couple of hours."
Right.
I said, "Okay, I'm glad you feel that way. I think you will." And that's when I said, "Okay, I have to leave, but before I leave, I want to tell you what's going to happen next. We're going to shave your head. We're going to give you a shower. And then when I come for you, I'm just going to walk up and say, it's time. You walk in on your own, and I'll walk with you," and mm-hmm. so forth. I talked about his final words and so forth. But anyway, all of that is the behind the scenes stuff that the media never knew about. Nope. And the same thing happened on lethal injection, a different scenario, but the inmate on the lethal injection gave me a mission, so to speak. He asked me to do something for him.
Sure.
After his execution, and I didn't want to do that either, but I did.
Right.
And those two things, both of those situations, kind of still haunt me. Mm-hmm. I get a little teary-eyed when I think about sitting down and this guy's pleading with me to eat it, to share his last meal with him. Yeah. It's just kind of there's no hate or hostility. Trust me, there is none. And the other inmate we executed, there was no. I mean, he asked me to do a favor for him. He didn't ask his attorney. He didn't ask his chaplain. He didn't ask the priest. He asked me. Why? Yeah. I've always pondered, why did he ask me? Why didn't he do it himself? He could have.
Right.
I had to deliver a message to the woman he loved.
Right.
We would have given him a phone call to do it himself, but he didn't. He wanted me to deliver that message. So. Yeah. And I did, and that's kind of a haunting situation. I wrote about that. I called it the warden's curse.
But I'm glad you put it in the book because it speaks so much to the compassion that happens in prison. Mm-hmm. I've never been part of an execution, but I worked at a medical center for 14 years. So I knew a lot of inmates who passed away. And I don't tell a lot. I've mentioned it, but it's not something I hold out. But I've been there when inmates died. And they're in a room, nobody else there, and all they want is to hold your hand while they die.
Yeah.
And I've held the hand twice of inmates as they passed away, as you feel the cold, leave from their, or the heat leave from their body. And how do you not do that,
That's right.
as a human?
That's
and
right.
once you get to the point that you can't have some humanity, it's probably time to not be working in a prison, So I'm really glad that you put that in there. I thought it was a very moving part of the book.
Well, thank you. And like I say, that's behind the scenes, and that's something that's going to surprise a lot of people, I think, when they read about executions, is how compassionate we were and how respectful we were. And, you mentioned holding that guy's hand while he died. That's what an old guard does.
Yeah.
That's what an old guard does.
Sure.
An old guard has compassion, but now he'll beat your brains out if you make him, but he'll also show genuine compassion and humanity. And you'll see it time and time again with old school guards, and I consider myself an old guard.
Sure.
Now, let me say one other thing about my term in corrections.
Yeah.
I learned from the best, like I said in the beginning, I learned from old school guards, and their official title was guards. And I respected them so much, I tried to be like them.
Mm-hmm.
They were tough, but they were also, like I said, compassionate and try to do the right thing. For the most part, they weren't abusive at all. There were a few that were, but that was the exception. Mm-hmm. Now, as I progressed, and after I became, especially when I became warden, I used to go in the office. I said, I'm just a correctional officer. I'm a guard who happens to be sitting in the warden's chair. So I never want to lose sight of that. Security and control comes first. Mm-hmm. Everything else is second. In other words, these programs are all nice, but it'd be like mowing the grass when your house is on fire. You don't do that. You put the fire out first, then but yes. And that's the way I look at running the prison. I wanted to get control of the damn place before you can have any kind of programs.
Absolutely. And
I had to remind myself of that constantly. Parker, you're just a correctional officer who happens to be sitting in the warden's chair. Yeah. And that's the way I approach my job. And it worked for me.
Right.
It worked for me. I could have stayed as long as I wanted to, I guess, but it was.
Oh, hell, they'd let you go back now.
Yeah, they would. They would. I'm sure they would. Yeah. But the job started wearing on me.
Yeah.
There's this thing called PTSD.
Tell me a little bit about what you've been dealing with.
Here's what happens to you. I think if you're in a hot seat like the penitentiary, that where every day is danger, every day. Mm-hmm. Without exception, you're in danger every day, and you better put your back against the wall and keep your head on a swivel. I mean, you're just that kind of awareness. You better have that kind of awareness when you walk that yard. Yep. And I'd walk it as warden without a bodyguard. I mean, I'd go out there because I still saw myself as a correctional officer.
Right.
I just happened to have a suit and tie on, but and I'd break up a fight. I've rescued suicide attempts while I was making rounds. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I'm not too good to do any of those things just because I'm a warden. But sure. you in over a period of years, that constant exposure to stress and trauma, you won't even know it, but it'll start, it's filed away in the back of your mind. And mm-hmm. and I would always think, this doesn't bother me. I can do executions. I can see murders. I had, horrible murders. I even had a friend of mine killed one day at work. Mm. Yeah, she wasn't a correctional officer. She's a food service worker. Right. March 1st, 1984, Pat Ross was murdered in food service. And I was there that day. I helped escort the inmates to interrogation. But those things, all of those things, when you combine them all, not individually, one individual thing, but it's just it's 25, 30 years of doing that.
Sure.
Is going to have an effect on you. Trust me, it will.
It's cumulative. It's cumulative.
It's cumulative.
It's like drops. Well, being tortured with drops. Yeah.
it's like, I use the example in the last chapter that it's like, if you stare at the sun every day, if you stare at the sun, sooner or later, you're going to go blind.
Right.
That's the way, to me, that explains PTSD.
Right. You
go into that fire, you go into that when that gate slams behind you, you go in every day, you're going to be in a use of force situation. You're entering a place of danger. Mm-hmm. Things are happening. And you can't get away from it until you leave. And in my case, as warden, I couldn't get away from it because the damn phone rings. I live on the property. I never got away from it.
No.
And so It ate away at me. It really did. When I retired, that's when I didn't feel it until I retired. Well, I felt it about my last year as warden.
Yeah.
But other than that, I thought, it doesn't bother me. And
so if
for
you
the
don't
most part,
mind,
it didn't. Okay.
yeah, if you don't mind, because there's people out there I know that are going through the same thing. What did you notice? What was it that, kind of told you something's wrong here? If you don't mind talking about it.
There's a lot of things will happen to you. For one thing, your relationships with your family will be really strained.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, I started drinking.
Yeah.
But I got a divorce while I was warden because, your spouse can't relate to what you're feeling. You just can't. They don't know what you saw. You can't unsee the things you saw, but you take them home and you try to forget them. First thing I did when I get home is take a shower. Right. Wash that shit off me, especially when I worked the segregation unit. The first thing I did, I couldn't wait to get home and get a shower, get off of me, and then pop a beer and have a few drinks.
Sure.
That becomes a lifestyle. Plus, I smoked cigarettes. I was chain smoking. I'd smoke probably 2 packs a day, sometimes 3, and drink. Not get drunk every night, but drink.
Yeah.
Those are things you'll do, or at least I did, and people I knew did. And your relationships with your family gets very strained because they don't understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
And you don't want to talk about it. The last thing I wanted to do when I came home was talk about what I saw that day. Hell, I want to leave it there. I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So you have no one to talk to except unless you're around. A lot of the officers had every day after work, they'd go to a certain spot, or in some cases it'd be probably a bar. But in our case, it was a little park right around close to the penitentiary, and they'd already have cold beer in their car, and they'd pop those beers and get drunk before they ever went home.
Yes, sir.
So that's just a way of life after a while. And so you start noticing those kinds of things. Then you can't sleep very well.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky to get 4 hours sleep most nights. Lucky to have 4 hours sleep. And health-wise, blood pressure went sky high, so you take medication for that. I wouldn't take anything to help me sleep. I didn't want to get hooked on that crap, but anyway, there's just a whole host of mental things that happen to you, and eventually it'll break you down. I don't care how strong you are. Eventually, when you're alone with your thoughts, and usually it's after you retire, that's when it'll come back and slap you right in the face. Yeah. I mean, it knocked me down. I just couldn't believe I was having these nightmares. I'd wake up with nightmares. I would have flashbacks. I was drinking more. I was just angry. I could get angry at the drop of a hat for over nothing.
Yeah. Did you know what it was? Did you know it was PTSD, or did one of the doctors had to tell you, or no, I would say a doctor?
I didn't know until I was suicidal.
Okay.
And this is kind of a hard thing for me to talk about, but this is years after I retired, and I started writing this book, and I finally said, I'd written some of the book, and I was having all these, couldn't sleep and all these issues and drinking.
Yeah.
I finally said, I don't want to live this way anymore. I'm tired of it. I just don't want to go on like this. And I didn't know what was wrong with me.
Sure.
Anyway, I finally, I sat there one night. I'm going to say this, and this part probably isn't in the book, but I'm saying this in case there's officers out there who feel this way. Okay.
Right.
I was sitting there one night. My wife was gone taking care of her mother, so I was by myself. I had a fifth of whiskey and a 40 millimeter Glock, 40 caliber Glock.
Right.
They're on the nightstand right beside the whiskey bottle, and I was slugging the whiskey, and I'm thinking, I just don't want to live this way anymore.
Wow. And
so I thought, what, all this, I want to see what this National Suicide Hotline crap is all about. So I called them, and we talked for a while, and they didn't do anything. They said, well, you need to get some help. I mean, I finally said, well, okay, well, I'll let you go. And that was it. They should have called an ambulance.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
Right.
They didn't. And so I just continued to sit there, and I finally said, I'm going to give one other thing a try. I'm going to go see if I can find a doctor that can has some kind of medicine that will help me. And I was lucky. I found one that understood because he'd been in the military. He knew. I said, here's what's happening to me. He said, I understand. I said, what is it? I said, could it be PTSD? And he said, yeah, it's chronic. You have a severe case of PTSD.
Wow.
He said, I can help you. So he wrote about 3 prescriptions. He said, try this. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else.
Right. And
so that kind of pulled me out of the hole. Plus, I started going back to church, and I turned to faith to help me. I quit drinking for a while, but I thought I'm still drinking, but I'm not getting drunk every night.
Right. There's a difference.
I have a happy hour. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
But I still struggle with PTSD. It has not gone away. It will never go. I've learned this about it.
Right.
It'll never go away. Once you have it, you have it. You can't unsee the things you saw.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have to relive them to some extent. It's worse when you talk about it. And people say, well, you need to talk to someone to talk to. Hell no. It makes me worse. Just talking to you right now about this. It's just really hard for me to talk about it, especially the mental part of it.
Right.
But I'd almost rather not talk about it. But
so is that part of the reason you wrote the book? So that you could put it down, deal with it without having to talk about it?
No, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. I did go to a psychologist for counseling. He was a joke, and I knew it would be. Well, I didn't know it would be, but I thought I'll give it a try. But anyway, he said, oh, you need to write that book. I told him I started writing a book. He said, oh, yeah, it's going to be cathartic.
Okay.
Now, if you're not familiar with that term, look it up. I can't explain it. I understand it. It's, you kind of spill your guts out, and then everything will be okay.
Right.
No, it doesn't happen that way. No, I'm sorry, but so I had to relive all this stuff to put it in the book. But even if I hadn't done that, the book really wasn't cathartic. Okay. It really didn't help me. In fact, it made me worse.
Okay.
So I don't know what would have helped besides the medication I'm on. That has really helped. There is medication for this disease.
Okay.
There is medication. Trust me. But it'll never go away. You're always going to have it. You just have to learn to deal with it. Take medication. Try not to drink. I quit smoking, but those were my crutches.
Yeah.
That's how I dealt with it. I smoked cigarettes and drink.
Right.
And try not to talk about it.
So is retiring, and retiring's been difficult for me in some ways. I mean, I started this podcast. I still go out and teach in correctional centers and jails. So I'm still out there as part of it. But the day-to-day, where you've got that buddy that you talked to, the crew that you worked with, the shift that you trusted, that evaporates when you retire.
It does. Goes away.
That's kind of tough. Did you experience that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And to be honest with you, for the first 10 years after I retired, I didn't want to see anybody I didn't want anybody, but I mean, I didn't want to be around them. Yeah. But I didn't want to talk about this. I immersed myself in, I bought a little farm, and I did some woodworking, and I was kind of went to myself. I didn't go to parties. I didn't do that much social, because I was out on a 20-acre farm out in a rural area. So, and that's what I wanted. I enjoyed building a bonfire and sitting there with my wife and dog and that kind of stuff, going fishing. those kind of activities is what really what I want to do. Last thing I want to do is have my old buddies come around and us drink, talk about old times. I didn't want that. That's not helpful to me.
Right.
It just doesn't help me. I don't want to do it. Like Sam, most of them are dead now, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I had two of my real close friends commit suicide after they retired. Think about that. After they retired. Yeah. One of them was a lieutenant. One of them is in my book. Both of them are in my book. I didn't talk about their death, but they were both key players in some of these big events. And after they retired, both of them killed themselves with a gun.
Wow.
My next door neighbor, who was a correctional officer after I retired, he killed himself when he was still a correctional officer. Yeah. Now, why do people do that? Why did I almost do it? Yeah. I'm telling you, it's that constant exposure to stress and trauma. Yeah. That's what does it. And it accumulates over time. And you can't help it. You're not weak.
Right. No, absolutely not. But do you see, and you were in corrections before I was, but when I was first in corrections, early 90s, I didn't see staff suicides as much. It was a huge thing when one happened. It's almost at an epidemic level now.
Is it?
I mean, you get on LinkedIn or something, it's, every month, every week, you're going to see where another officer, and they post, we post our badges with our little black stripe in memory of. But what I'm just so hurt by the fact that so many people are taking that as a way out, and that's the only way out. And I don't know if it's because our profession isn't looked at the way it was before, or if it's a change in society, which society's changed by leaps and bounds in the last 40 years. But I don't know. I don't know why it's happening.
And that is hopefully where my book will help. Because think about the Vietnam vets. Mm-hmm. Okay, those guys went to war at a time when all their friends were protesting the war, all the colleges. That was a time period in the 60s and the early 70s when that was they were treated terribly. Mm-hmm. Coming back after is over there for 16, 18 months if they got drafted.
Right.
That's about all it amounted to, about a year and a half. They step right into combat, and then when they're done, after a year and a half, they're on a plane heading home, and they tell them before they board the plane, get out of your uniform. You don't want to go through an airport with your uniform on, because they would get spit on. They'd be called baby killers and all that kind of crap.
Right.
So that's what they had to come home to. They didn't have a welcoming crowd. They weren't heroes. They weren't treated like heroes.
They weren't treated,
Okay, now that's kind of, in a way, combat's different than what we did in corrections and police work. It's different, but in a way, correctional officers go into this combative situation, if you will. It's not the same. I don't want to make the comparison.
Sure.
And somebody say, well, that's not the way combat is. I know that.
Right.
But the point is, you go into a traumatic event, lots of it, violence, and lots of it. Now, especially as a correctional officer, you're not appreciated for that. Your bravery, your conduct, and run into a fight unarmed, for example, or stabbing, and we did that all the time. You're not appreciated. It's you're actually your second class to be a prison guard. Right. You just, you have no appreciation. You have no respect, and it's troubling. It troubled me, but that's the career. That's the path I chose. So I thought, hell with it. Even if I don't get respect, I know what I did. When you save a life.
Yeah, there's studies out there, and they've been around for years, back in the 70s, that talk about certain jobs are considered dirty work, and corrections is one of them that's listed in there. And it's not that we personally are dirty, but we're surrounded by low morals. We're surrounded by a job that's not looked well upon. We're surrounded by people who are shunned from society, and that's what we now take care of. And they say that part of that dirty work, comes off on the people that have to do it.
It does.
Yeah. So I want to ask one more.
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. Ask anything.
One more question, because when I picked up your book, there's a word on the front page that, or on the front cover, that you don't see a whole lot associated with corrections, and you do with law enforcement, you do with military, but you said duty, sacrifice, and leadership. Tell me why you put sacrifice on there, because just tell me your thoughts on that, because I find that very telling.
Well, I think you sacrifice a lot just by entering into this profession.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, or at least in my case, and most people I know, got into it because at the time, in my case, it was the only job I could find at the time. I kind of accidentally got into it, and I only wanted to stay long enough to find another job.
Right.
Most of us. Most people would say that.
Yep.
It's just to hold you over till you can find something better, something else. But here's the thing: when that gate slammed behind me, and when I went in on my first use of force, I hadn't been there long when that happened, my first use of force, and I thought, this is real shit here. This is real life. This is drama. I mean, I didn't like this. I'm not saying I like to use force, but I like the challenge of going in there and dealing with all that stuff. Very challenging. It's exciting in a way. Yep. You want to try to prevent it if you can, but when it happens and you run to it, there's that sense of accomplishment when you do that. Mm-hmm. When you run in and break up a fight, or maybe one of them's got a knife,
right?
And you don't have anything except just you.
Yeah,
your own skill set. Hopefully you can talk them out of it. But that's an accomplishment, and that's something that cops don't even do.
Right.
They're armed. Armed. We're not armed. and we're dealing with the people that they put in prison.
Right.
So that's a sacrifice to me, to be able to put yourself in harm's way, day after day after day. Knowing that you might not survive.
So why does the public?
You might be.
Why does the public look at what a law enforcement officer or military or some other public servant? Why do they look at that as a sacrifice? But you don't see that term used towards us, even though we sacrifice a ton to be a public servant.
Probably more so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can answer that, but here's what I do know. Police are very visible. Mm-hmm. It's on the news every day. Ones get shot when they shot a suspect, or all that, and you see it on TV, whatever.
Sure.
There's a lot of glory for being a police officer. Yeah. Bravery, and it's a glorious, honorable profession, and so forth.
Sure.
When is corrections ever mentioned? Never.
And I'll bet money.
And when it is, they call them a prison guard.
Yeah, but I'll bet money there are lives that you saved during your career.
Oh, absolutely.
And that would be front page if it was any other profession. I don't know.
Well, I rescued a hostage. That's in the very first. I saved his life, or at least I think I did. This inmate had an officer hostage, and I was a hostage negotiator. Did I save his life? Yeah.
Yeah.
Another time in Cleveland, Ohio, when I was warden, an inmate, we had a house surrounded, and we were about to capture him, but he stepped out of the house. We had it surrounded with his girlfriend in a headlock and a knife at her throat, and I was 5 feet away. Something I was going to kill him.
Right.
But I finally convinced him. I was pointing at him, and I was backing up as I was doing this. Said, if you let her go, or I'm going to your head off.
Right.
I won't say what I said, but it was pretty ugly. I had to say it about 3 times. He finally did. He shoved her to the side, then came after me. Now, did I save her life? Yeah. I think I did.
Was it front page news?
Nobody ever knew it.
I know.
No. We captured the inmate. We cuffed him, put him on the ground. I didn't have to shoot him. You have to read the book to see what really happened. But anyway, we cuffed him, had him on the ground, put him in one of our cars, and took him back to prison.
Yeah.
We didn't even call the police. We did it all ourselves,
Yeah.
And this is in a bad neighborhood in Cleveland. So, anyway, so yeah, you call it a hostage rescue? Well, I do. I mean, she was a hostage there for a moment, anyway, and I was ready to kill him over her, and I didn't. She had just gotten out of prison herself, but nevertheless, those are all incidental things. But even inside the prison, when we run to a fight and break it up, had we not done that, that fight would have escalated to one of them got killed.
Yep.
I mean, almost in every case.
Absolutely.
So how many times did we do that? I can't even count them. I don't even know how many fights we broke up.
I know.
You just let that fight go and see what happens. One of them get dead. You can beat somebody to death pretty easy.
Sure.
Or somebody throw you a knife or whatever. It happened all the time. We did see a lot of murders, but we'd still run to the murder as quick as we could get there, try to save the inmate's life.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we didn't get there in time. But that's just the way that's our life. That's what we do. But the public doesn't know that.
They don't.
Maybe this book, it's really the book is catching on. It's gaining traction. It's gotten pretty high ratings on Amazon because I think it does shine a light. It takes people behind the scenes what we do.
Yeah. What
happens every day. Well, especially mostly the maximum security prisons, but it can happen in any prison. Mm-hmm. These things, these fights, these stabbings, these escapes, murders, staff murders. They just lost an officer at Ross Correctional Institution in Ohio.
Yep,
an officer was killed just last week.
Yep.
That was, there's a danger. That reminds you when there's an officer or a staff killed, that should be a harsh reminder. It was for me that could have been me.
Yeah.
And you know that when you walk in that gate, you better, if you don't think so, you're sadly mistaken, because it has to hit home. That could be me. So what does that tell you? That tells you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to work as a team. You need to look out for your fellow officer.
Absolutely.
There's a lot that can be done once you realize that we work in a place of danger, and that next body laying there could be me.
Right.
It could be my friend, but it's going to happen time and time again. Not that often, thank goodness, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Too much.
Too much.
Well, Warden, I can't thank you enough for being on here. Everybody, let me get this over here.
Okay.
The book Guard, I'm going to tell you, I have read as many correctional books as anybody. You've listened to my podcast, the people I've interviewed. This is one of the best books written about prison. I applaud your honesty that you had in there, all the way from the way things were, the way they changed, to the way they affected you at the end. Mm-hmm. Your honesty was the biggest part of that book, and I highly recommend it. I will absolutely put it in the show notes here. So if anybody wants to click below in the show notes, it'll take you directly to his book so that you can order it. I'm also going to put down some information in there about of course, the suicide hotline, and some other links that'll, if you're having trouble, if you're thinking that you want to reach out and get some help, some places that you can do that. So I'm going to put that in the show notes also.
Get on the right medication. If nothing else, go see your doctor.
Absolutely.
PTSD can be treated. Mm-hmm. It can be treated with medication. Yeah. There might be other therapies and so on. I'm not saying there's not, but go talk to your chaplain or whatever, but get on the medication that's going to help you.
Okay.
That's what I had to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on here. Thank
yes,
you so
sir.
much for your honesty, and thank you so much for your service. I mean, good Lord, you spent how long total? I don't think we got there.
I don't know, 30, I guess.
30 something. Yeah.
I left and came back. I mean, I don't know. I bounced around. I spread mine out over 5 decades.
Okay.
I've been involved in corrections for 5 decades, but I spread it out.
Okay.
I took a 5-year vacation or 6-year vacation once. It came back to the same damn job I left. So.
Yeah, a lot of us do that. So
yeah.
Well, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
And thank you to all the correctional. Thank you to all the correctional officers that are going to watch this. Keep your head up and be careful, and don't underestimate PTSD. Get on the medication. Get help if you think you're experiencing it. It'll help you.
Perfect.
That's all.
Have a good day, Warden.
Thank you.
I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer Podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.